Hello peeps, and welcome to another edition of Politics is Life. My name is Yetunde Makinde. Today's content I've titled Africans and the Only Blacks. I've been wanting to do this for quite some time. I just never got around to it. But last night I did a tweet that centered on the subject, and I thought I may as well just do a video content to expatiate on the topic. So, in the modern world, Black people mean Africans, and this is erroneous, as this was not the case in prehistoric times. First, in ancient times, skin color was never a thing, and one's ethnicity was all that mattered. It may interest you to know that there are 3,000 ethnic groups in Africa. Africa also has the highest and most diverse groups in terms of genotype and phenotype in the world. There are 800 plus ethnic groups in Europe, and Asia, East, West, South, and Southeast too have innumerable ethnicities. Second, you must recognize that much of the labels used today, or that were used by Europeans in the past, for example, Caucasoid, Negroid, Mongoloid, Hamitic, Semitic, Japhetic, are all recently coined words. Some of these labels are outright derogatory, having political undertones, still others religious coloration. Black and Negroid are especially derogatory. Okay, maybe black is not exactly derogatory, but when viewed in relation to how, in geopolitical terms, Africa is divided into North Africa and Sub-Sahara Africa, the derogatory insinuation become apparent. Sub-Sahara Africa is of course just another schism of those who run the show on planet Earth. The northern tip of Africa is not considered a part of the continent, particularly Egypt. You know, there's this raging debate that's been going on since forever, where certain people from certain quarters postulate that the Egyptian civilization couldn't have been developed or established by Africans. Even though Egypt is evidently on the continent, people still make that argument. That's just by the way. Let me just stick to the main topic of today, which is that Africans aren't the only black people, or better put, Africans aren't the only dark-skinned people on Earth. Factually speaking, all Homo sapiens, that's populations without admixture, are a range of dark brown to light brown, that's walnut brown to almond brown. Walnut is asala or Hausa. I actually tried to get some asala, but asala is out of season or is not yet in season. So I'll just use the color of my rim to show the color of walnut. So you really get Africans. There are no black Africans, but you'll get people who fall between this shade of my rim, even darkened variations of this shade, to almond brown, to light brown, my complexion, and people who are far lighter than I am. Because realistically, nobody is this shade. Nobody. If you have a black phone, place it next to people you know who are dark-skinned, and it's never this shade. I searched extensively. I didn't find anyone with this shade. Nobody is this shade. Nobody. I just didn't find this shade. The reality is, skin color in Aboriginal people, again, populations without admixture, is on a spectrum. That a divergent range of melanin levels are present in Homo sapiens, accounting for the varied shades or the varied hues of dark to light complexion you find in all indigenous people across the world, from Africa to Oceania to Asia and to the Americas. Never mind that North America, that's the United States and Canada, are now occupied by people of European descent. In view of the things that I've said thus far, it's rather unfortunate that in the 21st century, indigenous people are still discriminated against on the basis of their skin color. certain indigenous people in Asia, for example, are called primitive. They're tagged primitive as a result of these indigenous people electing to live in accordance with the rhythm of nature. That's just by the way. To get back on track, the use of the identifier black to describe an African, or blacks to describe us as a collective, is a colonial political term which is used to give legitimacy to the so-called whiteness of Europeans, except there are no white-skinned people. Nobody is white. Nobody is this shade. Nobody has this skin pigmentation. Nobody. It's imperative to state that until admixture, likely with Homo Neanderthal, and I know this is not a politically correct thing to say, but until admixture, all peoples were a varied shade of dark brown, varied shade of this color, to light brown. That's just the truth. That's the reality. Furthermore, if you take a critical look at the popular narrative of Europeans turning pale because of migrating into colder regions, you'll find it just doesn't add up. At least for me, it doesn't. And here's why I say that, using the Inuit. The Inuit are a dark-skinned people. They're dark-skinned in spite of the fact that they live in extremely cold regions. But as soon as you point out this fact, to those who advocate for that theory or that narrative that Europeans became pale-skinned as a result of migration, the minute you point out the Inuit, then the argument shifts to Europeans not having access to vitamin D from an animal source, which makes no sense. There are rivers and oceans in Europe. Unless those who push this narrative are going to argue that Europeans back then, during the early stages of the development of man, didn't know how to fish. Soon as you point this out, the gears shift again, this time to the snow that covers Alaska and Siberia, where Inuit are found. The argument then becomes that the sun is reflective on the snow, that region is covered in snow for the most part of the year, and that the sun reflecting on the snow causes the Inuit to tan, which is just ridiculous. I think it's far more honorable to admit that we do not know how Europeans became pale than pushing nonsensical narratives that are just laughable. I'm not a scientist, but I consider myself highly reasonable and quite analytical. So let's do this together, looking at generally available scientific information and listening to the dose of common sense. The Eurasian pale skin is arguably a mutation. I think that's something all scientists agree on. It's a mutation, a genetic mutation. Melanin is what gives skin pigmentation. And there are two types of melanin, eumelanin and pheomelanin. Eumelanin produces brown and black pigment, and pheomelanin produces a reddish hue. This suggests that the highest gradient of melanin will result in very dark skin. Remember, the color of my rim will result in this color, very dark skinned, darkened variations of this shade, which I call walnut. And the lowest melanin presence will result in, can you guess it? Albinism. The lowest gradient of melanin in a person will result in albinism, as seen in Africans and other aborigines. Suffice to say, the pale skin of Eurasians is not albinism. That's just common sense. I'm fair complexioned. I'm not pale. I'm fair complexioned. Nobody can call me pale. An albino is pale. because an albino would be at the, I mean, like I said, it's a spectrum. Skin pigmentation is a spectrum. Here you have people who are really dark skinned, darkened variations of my rim, and at the other extreme will be albinos, will be albinism. That's why we have albinos. When you see an African albino, you know. When you see an Asian albino, you know. Europeans are not, I mean, to my mind, the Eurasian pale skin is more than likely the admixture with Homo neanderthal. And I know this is not a politically correct thing to say. And you would even find that study that Europeans actually didn't get the pale skin from Neanderthal. But scientists tell us that Europeans or Eurasians have 1 to 4% Neanderthal genes in them, and that the pale skin only became a feature some 6 to 8,000 years ago. Before that, remember, before that, all peoples were light and walnut brown, as is still evident in all indigenous populations around the world. Also, it's important to state that Neanderthals went extinct 40,000 plus years ago. So you may wonder, what's the point of this short exposition? Why am I doing this? It's to stoke the consciousness of Africans. I think in the 21st century, we don't have to put up with labels that do not describe who we are. I think it's ignorant on our part to continue to carry the relic of colonialism. Because remember, tagging a person black is to justify the whiteness of Europeans, except there are no white people and there are no black people. It's okay if Europeans still want to retain white as an identity, but I think it's important for Africans to wake up to the reality that we're not black people. The dark-skinned people are found everywhere in the world. If in geopolitical discussions, people don't have a need to call the Asian black people, yeah, because the indigenous population in Asia are dark-skinned. If in geopolitical discussions, Asians are not called black people, I don't think Africans have to put up with that label. I don't think Africans have to put up with the segregation that happens in the scheme of geopolitics, where Africa is segregated into North Africa and Sub-Sahara Africa. In geopolitics, when other continents are discussed, it's just Europe or Asia. So why does that segregation have to come when it's Africa? It's because nobody reckons with us. It's because we're treated like we don't matter. And truly, Africa just doesn't matter in geopolitical scheme of things. We don't, because the continent is in a mess. And Africans themselves are a lost group. We don't even know who we are, because if we know who we are, we won't let others stamp on us an identity that doesn't describe who we are. We're not black people. We're Africans, same way others are Asians or Europeans or Americans. So why does it have to be different with Africans? Nobody's going to sort us out. I mean, the fact that Africa is in a mess is on us, and only us Africans can fix the continent. But how do we begin to do that if we don't even know who we are, and we take every kind of label, we take every kind of insult, we take every kind of derogatory discriminatory labels from just about anyone? We need to wake up. The point of this channel, besides creating awareness for my book, is also sharing invaluable information that can stir the consciousness of the average African. We need to wake up so that we can fix our continent. Nobody else can fix Africa but Africans. That's the core message that I really wanted to put out there today. So until I come your way next time, it's Yetunde Olokun saying, Ire.